Well, hey, I was telling my family about the notch in my wedding ring that I received shortly after we were married. We lived in Phoenix, Arizona, and I was one evening with some buddies climbing a mountain there on the east side of the city, and you know how maybe you don't, but in Phoenix, this is how it goes. You have a gradual approach to the mountains, and then eventually everything becomes steep and jagged and dangerous, more intense. And so this occurred. This little notch out of my ring occurred when it was dark. We were up high, and I lost my footing. I grabbed a rock and it snagged on it, and it probably kept me from falling a long distance, but took a chunk out of my ring. Either way, you get the idea that these kinds of hikes kind of start out gradual and then they get steep and intense. And that's where we're at in Mark today with our GLBC connections as we think about faith and belief in following Christ, being a disciple. Things have started out and they're starting to ramp up. And so like we've just looked at previously in chapter 9 with Pastor Brian, the transfiguration. That's an important moment in the gospel. Before that, the disciples confess that Jesus is the Messiah, and then he calls them to take up their cross. And so, as we move along in Mark, the intensity is increasing, the confrontations are increasing, the spiritual forces are increasing as Jesus moves towards Jerusalem and the cross. And so we come to this place in chapter 9 where Mark wants to move us towards more and more robust faith and loyalty to Jesus Christ, to lay down our own lives and take up the cross and follow him. And so as we read this passage, we really see a few different kinds of people uh, as they approach Jesus, as they think about who Jesus is. And if you look at verse 14, you'll see who's in this story. It says, when they came to the other disciples, they saw a large crowd around them and the teachers of the law arguing with them. As soon as all the people saw Jesus, they were overwhelmed with wonder at him. And so we have disciples who are traveling with Jesus. We have other disciples that we're not sure who they are, but they're in the story and they're called disciples. Then we have these crowds who are enamored with Jesus, who see him coming and they run to him. It's almost like the Beatles or Elvis back in the day, right? Where the the young people run. Not exactly the same, but you get the idea. Then we have the teachers of the law who are arguing, and then there's one other person in the story who is central in the idea of where Mark is taking us in this passage. And so, as we keep reading, Jesus is presented with a problem, and it's a problem of unbelief. It's a problem of in the spiritual world, and so check it out, verse 16. What are you arguing with them about? He asked. A man in the crowd answered. Notice a man in the crowd. That's important. Teacher, I brought you my son, who is possessed by a spirit that has robbed him of speech. When it seizes him, it throws him to the ground. He foams at the mouth. He gnashes his teeth and becomes rigid. I ask your disciples to drive out the spirit, but they could not. I just have this picture of these disciples trying to do what Jesus does. Like they're saying, "Be gone," or "Come out," or I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't successful, right? And then Jesus really says something that helps us see what's going on behind the scenes. And he says this, "You unbelieving generation, um, how long shall I stay with you? How long shall I put up with you? bring the boy to me. He's really speaking to everybody and to us in this moment. And so they brought this boy to him. And when the spirit saw Jesus, and so this is a confrontation, right? It immediately threw the boy into a convulsion. He fell to the ground and rolled around, foaming at the mouth. And Jesus asked the boy's father, "How long has this been like this?" This is really Marcus trying to help us see the intensity of the problem here, right? So, I mean, this is serious stuff. And the father says, "From childhood, it has often thrown him into the fire or water to kill him. But if you can uh, do anything, take pity on us and help us." And so we have this moment where he says, "If you can," right? And so Mark's moving us along towards a robust faith to believe in Jesus Christ as the Messiah, the Son of God, who can do anything. And so we come to this moment, and hopefully we can identify with him and move with this man. And Jesus responds, "If you can," right? I can see him smiling. Everything is possible for one who believes. And immediately the boy's father exclaimed, "I do believe. Help my unbelief. Help me overcome my unbelief." That is the key line in the passage. And that is the line that everyone needs to pray in this passage, no matter where they're at, right? And so this is good. When Jesus saw that a crowd was running, so more people are coming, right, to the scene, he rebuked the impure spirit, and the spirit shrieked, convulsed him violently, and came out. The boy looked so much like a corpse that many said, "He's dead." But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up to his feet and stood him up. After Jesus had gone indoors, his disciples asked him privately, "Why couldn't we drive it out?" And he replied, "This kind can only come out by prayer." It's interesting. I didn't even recognize this earlier, but there's another person in the story, and it's the boy who Jesus lifts up and he stands, which may be most symbolic for all of us in this point of unbelief and asking God to help us to believe and have faith in the growing intensity of the Gospel of Mark. As we follow Jesus, he calls us to take up our cross, right? He calls us to obey. He calls us towards more and more robust obedience of Jesus. And so this is where Mark is taking us. It's interesting that the disciples ask later on, "How does this happen?" And then Jesus, says this can happen by prayer. And so Jesus is saying, "Hey, this is a new game here, guys. Things are getting intense, and this is special, and it only comes out by this kind of prayer." And not to put any hocus pocus on it at all. I think Mark is just trying to help us see, and Jesus is trying to help his disciples see that things are intensifying, and they're headed to the cross. And so as we wrap it up, I think it's good for us to ask, where are we at in our belief, right? Are we an arguing teacher of the law? Are we a distant disciple who's trying but struggling? Are we the dad in the story, or even the young man who, man, Jesus is gracious to him, and I'd like to know the rest of his story, right? But the dad says, "I believe, help me in my unbelief." And I think that's the confession we need as we think about how we're journeying along with Christ. "I believe, help me with my unbelief." This whole Mark series has been, I hope, helpful to help us think about who Jesus is and respond to him, and to believe in him. So I pray that as you reflect on this passage, you would say those words, "I believe, help my unbelief," and just call on Jesus. He will be faithful, and he will come to you as you move towards him, and he will lift you up like that little boy out of what everyone thought was death, right? We need Christ. We need him to make us alive again. So move towards Him. That's good. Well, I hope you have a great Wednesday, and God bless. Be safe, and we'll see you next time.